me the opportunity to share some of my experience with you today. I hope that you'll all be able to take away something of value and apply either for yourselves or for someone you care about. My name is Jeremy Dvorak. I'm a certified financial planner and a chartered advisor for senior living. I have a private financial planning and wealth management practice called Potomac Financial Group in Ellicott City, and I'm also the treasurer for COGS. I've been a financial planner for 17 years, and in that time, I've specialized in working with people on the verge of retirement and helping them through the remainder of their lives. I also work a lot with the children, powers of attorney, and trustees for these aging adults and helping them extend the life of their savings as long as possible. I've had the privilege of consulting with many people in this critical time, and I've gained a very good understanding of how people think about managing their money. And the biggest issue I see is that people are basing their strategy on two things. One, fear of losing, which makes sense, of course. And then two, the way things were done in the past. And this is often based on how their parents managed money. Well, a lot has changed over the past 10, 20, or 30 years. And the purpose of my presentation today is to help you and perhaps the people you encounter in your daily travels be able to answer these three key points. What are the risks that we face in the later stages of life? And more specifically, when we're spending the money that we've saved during our working years? Why some of the ideas we have about managing money during these times don't work as well as they used to? And finally, what do we do about it? How do we put together a plan to make the most of what we have while protecting ourselves at the same time? I have a handful of slides that I'm going to use to illustrate our points. And one thing I want everyone to know up front is that some of the slides are very simple and easy to see and understand. Some of them are a bit more complex and there's a lot going on. So I'm going to walk you through them, but if you're using a smartphone to watch this, just be aware some of them may be harder to see than others. And we're talking to a large group of people here. Some folks will have more knowledge about these topics than others, but I've tried to put this information together in a way that helps as many people as possible. So the first thing to keep in mind through this presentation is that we're not talking about how to manage money while we're still in the accumulation phase. When we're still working and saving money, we have a whole different set of risks and needs than we do later in life. Once we've stopped working and saving, we enter the stage of life where everything we do matters. We have to make plans for the rest of our lives, and we don't have the luxury of knowing how long that might be, how our expenses might change, and particularly how our healthcare needs and expenses might change. We don't have a crystal ball, and we don't have a time machine to go back and fix any mistakes that we make along the way. So it's very important that we have the right information as we put our plans together for the future. We're also not going to get into detail about how to manage your spending in those later years. We're going to assume that you have a good handle on where your money's being spent, and that our job is to figure out how to help you manage the funds you have so you can afford to meet those expenses over your lifetime. And the most common way I see people approach this without the help of a professional is to try to make everything they have as safe as possible. And this is where some of the previous generation's ways of doing things don't work the same as they used to. So the old way of doing things was for people to invest in stocks and bonds and so forth while they were working. And as they got closer to retirement, many people would switch to being much more conservative. And they would use things like savings accounts, CDs, and very conservative government bonds. The idea being, we don't have time to recover if the market goes down, so we can't afford to lose anything. Well, that theory has a number of holes in it. We're going to talk about a couple of them today, but first we have to have an understanding of why that logic doesn't work. And to do that, we need to talk about those risks that I mentioned. So risk, to put it very simply, is the possibility that things may not go our way. It's the chance that something could go wrong that could potentially cause us to run out of money earlier than we want. And when most people think of risk, they think only of losing money. But when we're living off of our savings, that really is only one piece of the puzzle. Some of the bigger challenges we face are not so obvious. And the first challenge we need to discuss is inflation risk. So inflation is the natural rise in the cost of goods and services that happens over time. It's why a gallon of milk costs more today than it did 10 years ago, as well as a book of stamps and a car and a retirement community, healthcare, and so on. Inflation risk is one of the biggest concerns we have to face, and it's especially dangerous because it has a very slow, pervasive effect on our money that's difficult to see, but we know it's there. And this slide shows a simple example of how inflation works. So in this example, if someone has a $200,000 nest egg, when they begin their retirement and had an average of 3% inflation, in 20 years, it's worth about half of what they started with. So in other words, that $200,000 will no longer buy them $200,000 worth of goods and services. It'll only buy them about $100,000 worth. And this is because even though their bank or retirement account statement still says $200,000, everything around them now costs double what it did in the past. So it just doesn't go as far. So with inflation, time is always working against us. This next slide shows how interest rates have changed over time. And this plays into the inflation risk, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But what I want to point out here is how interest rates have steeply declined over time. So we are at the lowest interest rates right now we've ever experienced. Although they are exceptionally low right now, they have really been quite low for the last 10 years or more. And this chart goes back to 1958. And if you think about where many of our current retirees gained their knowledge about finances, it was often from previous generations who lived through times of very high interest rates. If I had $1 for every time someone said to me, oh, I remember when you can get a CD for 12 or 14%, I'd have a lot of dollars. But if you look here, you can see in 1981, the 10-year Treasury was paying almost 16%. Well, those days are long gone, and we don't expect them to come back anytime soon. And for those who don't know, the 10-year Treasury is a common way of expressing the general level of interest rates. It's also widely considered to be the safest place you could invest money, and it refers to the 10-year Treasury note, which means if you were to lend the federal government money for 10 years, you could expect them to keep it safe, and the rate is how much interest their way would pay you each year that they held your money. So in 1981, you could lend the federal government money for 10 years, sit back and earn 16% a year until they eventually gave you your money back. Fast forward to where we are now. On September 30th of this year, the same 10-year Treasury was at 0.69%, which means now if you lend the federal government money for 10 years, you're not even getting 1% per year. Meanwhile, inflation is currently running around 2%. And the long-term average of inflation is almost 4%. So the message here is that while the cost of things continues to go up, keeping our money in super safe vehicles might feel good, but you're actually losing money every year just to inflation. If our costs went up by 2%, but we only earned 1%, you can think of that as losing 1% for the year. And this slide talks about the same idea, but with dollars instead of percentages. So if you had $100,000 in a savings account in 2006, the bank would have paid you $4,510 in interest for the 1 year that you held your money with them. Meanwhile, inflation was about half of that. So you came out ahead. So there's our 4,500, and this little blue line down here, that was our inflation. And if you go back in time, you can see for most years that was the case. So here was our interest up here, down here was our inflation. Now, fast forward again to 2020 and look at those numbers. Instead of getting more than $4,500, the bank now would have given you only $220. It's quite a difference. And our little blue line of inflation is all the way up here. It says to beat inflation, we actually would have needed to earn $1,700. But we earned well below that. And as you can see, it's been that way for more than 10 years now. Now our interest is down here. Here's our inflation up here. So what's even more striking, and I think this may resonate with a lot of people listening today, is that we actually needed $4,475 to keep up with the cost increase in our medical costs. So even if we're receiving the same level of medical care because of inflation, the costs actually go up much higher than the other things that we spend money on. So this right here is what we're up against. At a bare minimum, we have to figure out how to at least earn enough on our savings to keep up with our medical and other expenses over time. And because interest rates are so much lower than they used to be, we can't do what the previous generations did and just put everything in the bank and hope for the best. We have to look for other ways to keep our money working. This slide's just a very simple picture to show how someone who's very conservative might be able to improve their earnings without taking a whole lot of risk. In real life, there's more to it than this, but I just wanted to show that we need to use a few different types of investments to try to at least keep up with inflation. And in a portfolio, we have three basic categories: stocks, bonds, and cash. Generally speaking, the cash is the safest because our money's protected from going down. Bonds are the next safest because even though they can lose money, they don't do it very often. And when they do, it's generally not a big loss. And because of that, they tend to pay us a little better rate than cash does. And then there's our stocks, which we would expect to pay us the most over time because they go down in value more often. And sometimes they go down quite a bit. Higher risk, higher potential for return. So the question most people have is, why would I even bother with stocks if they're so risky? And the answer goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, because we cannot afford to anymore. Can't afford not to, anymore. And so the bonds and cash that seem safe won't earn enough to keep up with our costs. So if we want to stay ahead, we need something that can keep up. And the idea here is, although these numbers aren't exact by any means, is that even in a very conservative portfolio, we still want to have some allocation to stocks, but just a small amount. Too much in stocks can spell trouble, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for now, just keep in mind it's about finding the right balance. And we must always remember that when you're investing, you may have a profit or a loss, regardless of your strategy, even including diversification and asset allocation. So here's where we start to go into a little more detail. And again, I know some of these slides are a little busy, but I'll try to make them easy to understand. This chart shows the long-term growth of the stock market going all the way back to the year 1900. That's 120 years ago. We're not going to delve into the full history of the market, but what we do really want to understand is that even though the stock market over time has had many, many bumps in the road, over a long enough period of time, it has always bounced back and it continues to move upward. And in my talking with many aging adults, what I found is that often people are only focused on these bumps in the road, and they forget those bumps are actually short-term in nature. Most years, the stock market actually does very well. In fact, the average return of the stock market over time has been just under 9% per year. And actually, the last 10 years have been a little better than that. So compare that to a CD at the bank, maybe paying 1%. It's a huge difference. And that difference really adds up over time. It's what gives our money the chance to grow and keep up with that cost of everything around us. But what comes along with that is some periods of short-term pain. And the better we understand that pain and prepare for it in advance, the better we can withstand it and keep ourselves moving in the right direction. So this chart shows us what that pain actually looked like over the last 40 years. This goes back to 1980. And what it's showing, although admittedly it's not easy to see, is year by year since 1980, if you had money invested in the stock market, what it would have felt like over that time. So each one of these little bars is 1 year. This is 1980, 1981, 1982, and so forth. And the top number here is how much the stock market returned for that 1 year. So in 1980, it was 26%. We invested our money in the stock market in 1980, we made generally 26%. The next year in 1981, you can see the bar went down. So that means the market was actually down. In this case, it was 10%. 1982, market was up again. This time made 15%. So the bars that are up are good years and the bars that are down are bad years. And as you can see, by far, most years the stock market is up. Some years it's down. And we need to have the right amount of stocks in our portfolio so that the good years help us, but the bad years don't hurt us over the long run. That's the whole name of the game. Also, on another note, if you look at these little numbers with the dots at the bottom, those numbers are showing how far down the market went at some point during the year. So even though this particular year, which was 1985, the market rewarded us with a 26% rate of return, at some point we felt some pain because we would have watched our stocks go down by 8% during the year. So that's the ups and downs that come along with the stock market. And again, it's why although there are nice rewards to be had when investing in stocks, we can't put everything there or it would just be too much of a roller coaster. This is a very busy slide. And if you're on a smartphone, you may not even be able to see the details, but I'll keep it very simple. Each one of these little boxes is a different type of investment that you would typically have in a portfolio. So this is our cash. This is our bonds. So our large company stocks, small company stocks, and so forth. And each column here is a different year. So it starts at 2005 and it goes all the way up until now. The boxes on the top were the best performing for that year. The boxes on the bottom were the worst performing for that year. And what this is showing you is if you pick any part of the investment world and you try to follow it year by year, there's no way of predicting which areas will do the best. So let's use our bonds as a good example here, which is the light blue box we call fixed income, which is also known as bonds. In 2005, bonds were the worst performing area. They paid us 2.4%, but everything else did better, including our cash. But you can follow it along and you can see that 3 years later, it was the best performing area. And then if you look a couple of years later again, it was almost the worst performing again. And it's the same thing with all the other boxes. But there's one box here in the middle called asset allocation, which tends to just ride in the middle. That box is a mix of all these different things working together. And it's what you would typically see if you have a diversified mix either on your own or if you work with a company that helps you manage it. It's never the highest, it's never the lowest, but generally it's a stable approach over time. And the more we need to depend on our money to pay our bills, the more we want to have a smooth, steady ride so we don't get surprised with any major swings from year to year. So when we put all this stuff together, what we're really trying to accomplish is to have our money working for us as much as possible, but also protect ourselves from losing too much. The whole point, again, is to extend the life of our savings, not shorten it. And this last chart just shows how over time, by having a different mix of investments and keeping them throughout our lives, we have the opportunity to get a nice return on our money without being put in a bad position when things go down. So at the bottom, you can see that these are different time periods. There's a 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, and 20 year. And this goes back to 1950, so it's 70 years worth of information. And what this is showing us is that stocks in the first bar here, these are bonds, and this is a 50-50 mix of the two. And it shows us what the best outcome was in that time period and what the worst outcome was. So going back to 1950, if we put money in the stock market for any 1 year, going back to 1950, the best 1 year we had was we made 47%. 47%. The worst we did in any 1 year was we lost 39%. It's a pretty big difference, right? But if we put the money in for 5 years at any point going back to 1950, now we can see the best we did in any 5 years was an average of 28% per year. And now the worst we did was lose only 3% per year over a 5-year period of time. We could have held that money in the stock market for any 10-year period. The best we would have done was make 19% per year. And the worst 10-year period was a loss of just 1% per year. Our bonds are the same in principle, but in the short run, 1 and 5 years, they actually protected us a little better. So they weren't down as much as the stocks were over that period of time. So when we have short time horizons, the stocks have a lot of risk, but the bonds are going to be a little more stable. And then the last column here, and this is a summary of everything we talked about today. If we had just a mix of 50-50 stocks and bonds over a 1 year period, we had a pretty wide range of results. But if we left our money in for just 5 years, we never had a period of time that we lost money. The worst we'd done going all the way back to 1950 was to make 1% a year. And in the best 5 years, we actually would have made 21% per year. So the message here is that we need to have two things to give ourselves the best chance of success. We need to have a mix of different investments that goes beyond keeping our money in the bank, even if it's outside our comfort zone, and we need to have time. The less time we have, the more conservative we should be. And the biggest issue I found over almost 2 decades is that nearly every person I talk to underestimates how much time they really have. People tend to think about what's going to happen in the next 6 months or a year, maybe 2 years. We really have a hard time getting people to step back and remember that the real time horizon you're working with is the rest of your life, however long that may be. And everything you do with your finances needs to be about preparing for that time. So to wrap all this up, here are the main points to remember. Our time horizon is the rest of our lives, however long that may be. We need to prepare for potentially a lot of years. And in that time, we don't exactly know how our expenses are going to change, but we do know they're going to go up. The old way of doing things is just too risky these days. We need to have the right mix of tools in our toolkit based on the current environment, and savings accounts and CDs won't cut it. We can still be conservative with our money, but a more prudent approach for most is to use a combination of stocks and bonds with our cash to help outpace that inflation. Don't underestimate how much time you may need your money to last. Do the right things to prepare for that, even if it takes a little more effort and maybe it's outside your comfort zone. And if you need help, don't be afraid to ask a professional. Their experience might just be the difference between the comfortable future we all wish for and the difficult one that many of our fellow humans face. I hope you found this material to be helpful, even if it's a little technical at times. Please feel free to contact me at any time with questions. I know many people listening serve the aging members of our community, so I hope you can pass this knowledge along to them. Thank you for showing up today and every day. Take care and be safe. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mike Mooney, who will talk about financial and long-term care planning, and he has a guide to the top 10 financial planning tips. So I'm going to stop my screen share and turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate that. And I seem to be having a little bit of problem with my video, so I apologize for that. I do want to share my screen. Is that something I need to get from you, Beth? Or how does that work?
You should be able to do it.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to talk about today is, hold on just a second. Is we're gonna start off by looking at different ways to develop an effective income strategy for portfolios. So I'm going to look at ages 30 to 65, leading to retirement, and what types of financial planning issues we want to address for those ages. And then I'm also going to talk about the long-term care strategy, long-term care insurance. I do want to say that I'm also a secretary on the board here at COGS, and I've been in business for over 30 years. Pilot Financial has about 100 employees across the country, and I'm the managing director here in Columbia. And we work with obviously many seniors. I have probably over 100 seniors that I work with, but a lot of my clients also are somewhere in the age between 25 and 65. So that said, what we're going to look at today is, let me just see here, as far as developing an effective income strategy. Now, why is it that we're not able to move forward? Oh, here it is. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a three-pronged approach we typically use to constructing portfolios. So really, we look at the practical side, the emotional, and the mathematical side of developing a portfolio for clients.
RIDE is the ticker.
I'm sorry?
Tesla was up quite a bit yesterday because they're in the.
Oh, I'm getting some feedback here. Somebody is not muted. Anyway, so an average couple can expect healthcare expenses to be $295,000 in retirement. And that's expected to grow 5%, 5.5% annually. So we have to plan for that. You know, that's a large amount of money that you need to plan for. Other statistics, many people don't realize this, but with a lot of you working in the market with older people, you know that people are living longer. So if you're age 65, there's now a 75% chance that one of you, if you're a couple, is going to live past age 85. And we also see that 32% of individuals 65 to 74 are now working, up from 17%. So what does that tell us? That tells us that our portfolios and our planning has to last longer than it normally did. And you know, we have to plan for these things like healthcare and essential expenses. So here's what I've seen as a strategy that we've used for clients, and we typically want to develop a financial plan for our clients based on their strategies and based on what they're trying to accomplish. But what we'll look to do is try to cover essential expenses first. And we can do this while we're 35, 45, 55, planning ahead. We'll have the reliable income sources can be covered by things like Social Security in the future. Hopefully, that'll always be there. Pension plans, but only 6% of people have pensions now. I mean, my dad worked for AT&T. He had a pension. A friend of mine just retired. He's with GE. He had a pension, but most people don't have pension plans anymore. So they have to do their own planning. And the other area they can look at for reliable income sources is annuities. So we're trying to cover these essential expenses with some of these reliable income sources, covering that gap first, and then other income sources like discretionary, all the stuff we love to do, like travel, entertainment, memberships in clubs or different places that we are members, maybe golf course, is all going to be covered by these other income sources, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, and et cetera. So that's what we're basically trying to accomplish here. One of the things that's really important to understand is that the amount of money you're going to receive from what we call those areas that we would typically rely on, like Social Security, is going to decrease over the years. So a boomer is going to have typically about 39% of his total income covered by Social Security, while in a millennial situation, it's only about 21%. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we have to do more planning now than ever. And that planning will include things like putting away money for retirement. How much money do we need for retirement? How much income do we have to generate for retirement? This 21% now, the rest has to be covered by other sources. The largest source is going to be this personal savings. And then the other source is going to be from employment income, which really means your IRA or 401k. So we really have to plan for that. And it's more important than ever to do that planning. Let's see, if we go to the next slide, seems like. There we go. So, we probably noticed this. I do see some people that have decided with this pandemic, I'm just going to call it a day and retire at this point because, they're able to. And if they're clients of mine, we go through the financial planning to make sure they can. But most people today are living longer, but they're also working later in life. So what this tells us is that this number here, the green, is people that are working longer, ages 55 to 64, are now working 60% of the time up to 2026, about 70%. This blue line is ages 65 to 74, and those are all increasing in age too, meaning people are basically working later in life. Many times they do or don't want to. Sometimes they retire and then they decide they want to have a part-time income or do whatever they always wanted to do, maybe photography or some other hobby, but sometimes they're required to because they don't have enough money to live on. So we want to, again, do the proper planning so that doesn't happen. Next slide here, let's see. Okay, so this is, I won't spend too much time on this because this is a similar slide to what we showed for Jeremy, or Jeremy showed as well. But this is basically saying, there's been so many reasons to sell over the last 10 years. This is only 10 years. Now the market is up 495% over the last 10 years. By the way, through this topsy-turvy year, the market S&P is up 12% this year, which is pretty incredible, but it is the case. But there's so many reasons that you might sell. We're getting into the emotional side now. why do you want to stay in the market? Well, you can see all these reasons why people might want to have sold: taper tantrums, Ebola virus, S&P enters bear market. But if you stuck with it, you did well. You actually were up 495% over the last 10 years, which is pretty incredible. So let's see. Here is, we find my many years that I've worked with clients, people do get emotional with their investments. They get emotional with hearing what they hear on the news. Sometimes I'll tell clients that are very apt to react to news. Maybe you don't want to listen to the news every day, or at least CNBC. This just shows that sometimes people that are typically reminded of volatility, meaning reminded of the market and how it's up and down, typically will go more conservative. Stocks, they might typically be 70-30 stocks, and they'll go to 41% stock, 59% bonds. Now, sometimes that's worthy, and that's something they should be doing if the risk allocation, if they're taking too much risk. But a lot of times it's just an overreaction to the market, and we don't want that. Especially, we see March, what happened there, and some people, didn't maybe got nervous, got out of the market, and by the time April rolled around, the market was back up another 15-20%. So it's important to stay with it. Here is that as well. So the average investor in stocks averages 5% over the last, and this is over the last 10 years. I'm sorry, 29 years, 1990. The market, though, has averaged 9.9. So it's that emotional part of it again. People tend to try to time the market, and you never can. And if you do, you typically suffer in returns. Bonds have done much better than the average investor return in bonds. And asset allocation, so this is what Jeremy is talking about too, but a 50-50 bond stock portfolio, not very aggressive, pretty conservative, has averaged 8% over the last 30 years. But the average investor that asset allocated and moved around was only doing about 2%. So stick with it. Don't overreact to the market. This is talking a little bit about withdrawal rates. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but the average used to be, we used to feel like 5% was okay to withdraw when you retired. Now it's down to comfortably 4%. But here it shows that the longer you have till retirement, the less you can take out. So a person that only has 25 years retirement, maybe they're 65 and they retire and they live till they're 90, they could take out typically 4.9, but the average, if it's 35 years and retire early, is only 4.3. So you really have to be cognizant of how much you're taking out. Part of our financial planning is to make sure that we're revisiting that on a monthly basis to make sure they're not withdrawing too much. Some of my clients and some people across our industry are using something called an annuity to provide a guarantee of income. This typical annuity might provide 5% guarantees. Now, the nice thing about that is that that's higher than typically you would want to draw from your portfolio. So it's giving you a higher protected income. And basically pension or Social Security is an annuity. So this is like a private annuity that's increasing that amount of income that you can receive. And what it does for you that's kind of nice is it allows you to free up more money. Now your portfolio withdrawal rate is only 3.4% instead of 4%, because you were able to increase the amount you were taking out based on the annuity. So have a financial representative help if you haven't tailored an investment plan. It's really important. 81% of pre-retirees think a retirement income plan is important, but only 77% of pre-retirees have no plan. So it's good. A lot of people think they should have an investment plan, but they don't. That's what this shows. I want to go really quickly into an option for long-term care planning, and one of many options. This is in the long-term care insurance area, and very quickly. So life expectancy is increasing by 9 years, and it's projected to increase another 7 years by 2060. So we try to look at different ways to provide for long-term care. One of those ways is through long-term care insurance, and there's been a few different ways to do that. One is the traditional long-term care policy. This one allows you to provide a legacy. It allows for both life insurance and long-term care. So just to get into that, well, you guys know these numbers, but right now the average nursing facility, skilled nursing facility private room is $105,000 a year, which, so long-term care insurance is guarding against that. We're probably all familiar with the ADLs. If you to qualify for long-term care, activities of daily living, you cannot be able to do 2 of these activities of daily living. And this type of insurance, again, it provides a legacy. So it allows for life insurance and long-term care. And then it also allows you to get your money back. One of the options allows you a 100% return of your money if you decide to change your mind. I don't want this policy anymore. That's a nice feature. So real quick here, this is how it works. Let me skip through here. Susan, married age 58. My wife's name is Susan. She's decided she wants to take out a policy that would provide $100,000 that she's going to put into the policy. So it's $10,000 a year, and she's married, so she's going to get a discount for that. And this is what it looks like. $10,000 premiums basically is going to provide her $116,000 death benefit. So that's life insurance. The nice thing about this, a lot of people with long-term care have said, I don't know that I wanted to take it out because I'll never need it. Well, this is a way for you to have that benefit of long-term care, but if you don't ever need it, you have $116,000 life insurance. And then there's $322,000 of long-term care. What I want to say about long-term care is that I had a client that had literally 7 years between he and his wife of 24/7 care, about $70,000 that they spent. I'm sorry, $700,000 that they spent in long-term care. Fortunately, they had a policy that picked up about $450,000 of it, but that's a lot of money to lose to your estate. It's really legacy or estate planning when you think of long-term care. And here's the future cost of long-term care. So remember, long-term care events happen to the entire family, not just a person. Build a comprehensive strategy. Now to wrap it up, I'm going to do a little bit of a David Letterman for anyone who remembers this, and have a top 10 financial planning tips. David Letterman was famous for his top 10. Have a financial plan in place. Always important to have a plan in place. Make changes as needed. If you need to get assistance from a planner, an honest assessment is extremely important. Sometimes we can just really be helpful to make sure you're right on track. Review any insurance that you have with your loved ones. Make sure all your documents are all in one place and are easily found, and let your loved ones know where they are. We have a checklist that we provide our clients of all their important documents. Establish a risk tolerance. We were talking about this a bit, and Jeremy talked about this. Allocate. It's important to know how to allocate among stocks, bonds, and cash to match your risk. Retirement income planning is important. How much can we take out for retirement? Number 6 is understanding long-term care. I think this is essential because people tend to work so hard to make their money and then they might have this lump sum of money, and it could easily go away if they don't do the long-term care planning. Update your will and estate planning. Many of our clients are coming to us to make sure that they give us get referrals to estate planning attorneys. Someone like Mark does a great job in that area, Mark Babatek. When you're working, contribute and maximize your benefits. Maximize your retirement plan. Make sure you're making that contribution. And if you're getting a match, always do the match. Always do the match. And establish an estimate of your needs and retirement income and essential needs. And then most importantly, update your beneficiaries. I had a client that came to me that didn't realize it, and she had an old life insurance policy and had her ex-spouse as the beneficiary and never updated it to her children. And that would have been, that ex-spouse would have received all that money. So very important to do that as well. So that wraps it up for me, and I guess for how we're doing on time, but any questions that you guys might have for either myself or Jeremy at this moment.